Okay, greetings, scholars. Right now, what we're looking at is chapter 6. This is the years following the development of the colonies between 1700 and 1770. These are going to be the years leading up to the American Revolution. As you learned in chapter 5, most of the colonies are not the primary focus of England. England is more interested in... let me move my coffee cup. England's more interested in this little tiny island down here called Barbados than it is in all of its North American colonies. The reason being, Barbados makes 3 times more wealth for England than all of the North American colonies put together. The thing that Barbados produces is sugar. Sugar is the commodity of the day. Sugar is worth more than its weight in gold. All the Pirates of the Caribbean, all those pirate stories, the primary thing they're fighting about is sugar. They are robbing cargoes full of sugar because Europe wants the sugar. And so the people producing sugar, so that's where England's interest is. The colonies, we produce staple products, things that are produced in mass that are sold for a relatively low price back in England. Things like rice, which is actually sold all over the world, fish, tobacco, all of these crops, these cash crops that the colonies have come up with are producing staple products. We produce them in mass, but it doesn't produce enormous amounts of wealth. Okay? So England doesn't pay attention to us, which causes a problem. As you learned in the last part of chapter 5, something called the Navigation Acts. England's economic philosophy is that of mercantilism. The crown manages the interests, the business interests of its empire, okay? Because it gets a portion right off the top of all of the profits from all of these corporations. Now, sugar produces a lot of money for the British crown, okay? So there's a lot of focus down in Barbados. We are kind of, what would you say, ignored. They basically, now they have these navigation acts in place that are designed to force us to only sell to English merchants, to only buy British products, to only buy tea from the British East India Tea Company, to only sell tobacco to the British tobacco merchants back in England, to only buy sugar and molasses from Barbados. They're designed to keep us from expending our wealth in other countries. And so for England, the philosophy is simple. You maintain a balance of the economy, imports and exports. You maintain this balance in the economy, and that protects the empire. Okay? Mercantilism will be the economic philosophy of the day until a very revolutionary document is written in 1776. Does anybody know what revolutionary document was written in 1776? That's right. The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith was written in 1776. Adam Smith was a Scottish economist, and he wrote this book called The Wealth of Nations, which is the first basic understanding of what we're going to call today capitalism. So it's capitalism that is going to come on the scene in 1776 that is going to fight against British mercantilism. Now, again, their focus is down here. We're kind of running our own show. Now, we obey the British laws for the most part. But if a Dutch ship rolls into harbor and it's full of tea, and they're interested in taking home tobacco, the merchants in Virginia might swap with them. They may trade. They may purchase all of that tea at a very, very low price and sell them all of that tobacco that they can carry at a very high price. This does violate the Navigation Acts. However, England has received all of the tobacco that they need up to this point. This is kind of surplus. So the colonists start doing these side projects. Some people would call it the black market or the underground market. But as long as we don't cost England money, they pretty much leave us alone. They really aren't paying attention. An example from something you guys may be familiar with. It used to be on the highway between Johnson City and Kingsport, the majority of the way, the speed limit was 70 miles an hour. 70 miles an hour. Now, most people, if the speed limit is 70 miles an hour, they may drive 80, 85. Some of you leadfoots may even drive 90. However, if a policeman is on the side of the road, how fast can you go without getting a ticket? Most people would say, about 75. And you're okay. And for the most part, you would probably be correct, right? Because the reasoning is, it's not worth it to the policeman for just 5 miles over the speed limit. Now, as long as it's not costing anything, as long as you're not being reckless, the policeman has no reason to pull you over as long as you're maintaining the flow of traffic. But then something happens. But then accidents start happening on one stretch of that highway. Really bad accidents. 5 or 6 people get killed. So what's going to happen is something has drawn the state's attention to that highway. And now you're going to be driving on that highway and you're going to be going 75 miles an hour and the policeman's going to pull you over. Why? Because you were going 5 miles over the speed limit. Now, most people are going to be pretty mad that they got pulled over because I've never been pulled over before. See, the problem that we're going to experience here in Kingsport and in the colonies is something called salutary neglect. Okay? The authorities neglect to enforce the laws because at the time it doesn't seem like it's that important to enforce the laws. Okay? And so in Kingsport, when people started dying, they started putting cops on the road to check the speed limits and to ticket everyone who was speeding, even if you're only going 4 miles an hour over the speed limit. And so eventually they changed the speed limit back down to 65 because people were getting killed. Okay? The same thing's going to happen in the colonies. The thing that's going to happen is this thing we call the French and Indian War. For almost 50 years, we've been ignoring the Navigation Acts. We've been purchasing tea from the Dutch as well as from the English. We've been purchasing molasses and sugar from the French, down in the French Caribbean islands, these sugar plantations. We sell tobacco to anybody who comes into the harbor. So we've been violating these Navigation Acts. And up to this point, it hasn't bothered anybody because we weren't costing them any money. Their focus was on Barbados. But something's going to happen right now. We call it the French and Indian War. That's going to cause England to start looking at us and trying to figure out what's going on. Okay? This map that I've got up here shows the what the colonies look like during this period. All of this pink territory is controlled by the French. Right? All of the Great Lakes, all of the Louisiana territory, and the St. Lawrence Seaway, okay, New France and Louisiana. We gained all of the Hudson Bay area from the Dutch, okay, but what we've got here is the French who control all this territory. Now they also have disputed territory, which is right through here, this stripy area right here. That's claimed by both the British and the French, okay? And especially just below the Great Lakes into an area that we're going to call the Ohio Valley is what's going to be the primary problem. Now, this is going to be the start of the French and Indian War. Many textbooks call it the French and Indian War because it takes an American focus, okay? It takes the focus of the colonists. The French and Indian War in the colonies lasts for 9 years. The British, the European approach to the French and Indian War, they refer to it as the 7 Years' War. Well, but it lasted 9 years. Yeah, but the British were only involved in it for 7 years. We tried to fight the French for 2 years by ourselves, and we had to have the British come and rescue us. Okay, the British military come to rescue us. So you'll see those two names used interchangeably. They're talking about the same conflict, the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War. They both mean the same thing, okay? So really what we're looking at with the French and Indian War is this territory right here is proving to be extremely profitable for the French merchants that are in the area. Now, a little map to give us a close-up just below Lake Erie. You've got this area that's going to be marked off and called the Ohio Company, all right? Now, who's our cast of players? Well, we've got Virginia land speculators, we've got Pennsylvania traders, we've got French traders in Canada, and then we've got the native peoples who already live there, who basically make money working with the French. So here's how it works. It's probably easier to see it with this map. The French have been trading with the natives back here in the backcountry. Furs primarily. It's the fur trade primarily. Okay. The French work with the Indians. The Indians produce these, capture these furs and process them, bring them to the Great Lakes. The French merchants purchase these furs and send them back to France. These Pennsylvania merchants decide they want some of that. They think, well, that's some good business going on over there. So they come across the Allegheny River and start trying to make contact with the Native American tribes that are already there. Okay? The French don't like that. So the French start building forts. Fort Duquesne, Fort Marchand, Fort Lebeau, Fort Presqu'île. They create these forts with about 30 or 40 soldiers in each one, just enough to scare the Pennsylvania merchants back across their side of the river. Okay? That whole time all of this is going on, the people in Virginia, right down here, establish a company for dividing up land and selling land to speculators so that you can have more settlements. Okay? They call this thing the Ohio Company. Again, the French are trading with the Indians, the Pennsylvania traders try to get in on the action, the French respond by building their forts. And then Virginia steps in. Virginia has a charter. Okay? The Virginia Charter, let's go back to this original map. The Virginia Charter says that Virginia owns all land from the coast to the Mississippi River and all land north to Lake Superior. So Virginia claims all of this land. Virginia claims all of that land based on the ancient charter that king, initially King James, and then Charles had given them, right? So England has this, or Virginia has this claim to the land. Now, all land west of the Mississippi, all land north to Lake Superior. It's a lot of land, and the French are smack dab in the middle of it. So the two brothers who established this company called the Ohio Company, Lawrence and Augustine Washington, they're the ones who are in charge of this company. Their trade, their family trade, is land surveying. That's what they do for a living. They get support from the royal governor of Virginia, Robert Dinwiddie. Dinwiddie becomes a big investor in the Ohio Company. And so they need to send a message to the French to tell the French, get off of Virginia territory, get out of Virginia land. So, who can we send? Who can we send to take a message? Who would be brave enough? Who would have enough courage to do such a task? Well, let's get our half-brother. Let's get George. George will do it. George will do anything. And so their younger half-brother, George Washington, is going to be picked to carry the message to the French, telling them to get off of Virginia land. Now, George was a middle child, not much hope of gaining any of the family's inheritance. He does have the family's trade. He is a land surveyor by trade, but he aspires to be a military man. He aspires to be a military man because during this time period, if you can't make your money off inheritance and land ownership, then you need to make your name as a military officer. Now, Washington is brilliant as a tactician. He's not a great field commander, but he is brilliant as a tactician. Because what Washington's going to do, as he takes this message to the French, he is going to take a northerly route to the north side of where the French are, and he's going to scout out territories. He's looking for defensible locations. He's looking for food sources. He's looking for fresh water sources. He's looking for game trails. He's looking for the native populations. Who's friendly with the French? Who's enemies with the French? He's searching out all that military intelligence, and then he arrives to deliver his message to the French. Well, the French just kind of laugh at him, and they send him packing, right? Washington doesn't go straight home. Washington takes a southerly route, right, going back. And he does the same thing. He looks for defensible locations. He looks for game trails. He looks for fresh water sources. He looks for the native population, who's friendly with the French and who's not friendly with the French. And when he gets home, he publishes his report and gives it to the governor. The governor is impressed. The governor is impressed. George Washington is a brilliant tactical strategist. Okay? The problem is, he's not a good field commander because a field commander has to be flexible. Washington is very much by the book. Matter of fact, Washington is the guy who would have written the book. But those guys aren't very flexible when it comes to the minute-by-minute decisions in warfare. I know the primary adage, no good battle plan ever survives the first encounter with the enemy, because it's going to change immediately. Okay? So what's going to happen? Robert Dinwiddie puts George Washington in charge of 160 men, and he sends them into the Ohio Valley and says, go defend Virginia's land claim. And so Washington, along with a group of Mingo Indians, they head into the Ohio Valley. Now remember, these French forts, they don't have large contingents of troops. There's just enough soldiers there to scare the Pennsylvania merchants away. Okay? Washington comes with 160 men. Okay? In the first engagement, the French, 14 Frenchmen are wounded, and they surrender, surprisingly. They surrender, and while Washington is getting the terms of surrender, negotiating with the French commander, the Mingo, who are with him, go on the rampage. And they start killing the wounded Frenchmen. See, the Mingo have been blackballed by the French. The Mingo are not allowed to trade with the French. Apparently the Mingo tried to cheat the French, and the French will trade with anybody unless you try to cheat them. So the Mingo believed that Washington was coming to destroy the French. They believed that's how these Europeans did things. But Washington was there to accept their surrender. But the Mingo had started killing these French people who had surrendered and the wounded Frenchmen, and Washington has to go out and save the French soldiers' lives from the Mingo Indians. Okay? Some of the French escape and make their way upriver. They are going for reinforcements. So Washington tells his men to build a fort, a small makeshift fort. They have to build what they call Fort Necessity. Why? It was necessary to build a fort. These names are just very simple, very simple. And we have to wait for reinforcements. One of two things are going to happen. Either the British troops from Virginia are going to arrive with reinforcements, or the French troops are going to arrive. Well, the Mingo, realizing that George Washington isn't there to destroy the French, they bolt. They blend off back into the woods before the French arrive. July 1754, the French are going to take the fort back. The French are going to arrive. Now, George Washington and his men are saved because the French commander tells this attacking force of Frenchmen that George Washington had saved their lives. And so Washington and his men are saved because he had stopped the Mingo from killing them. However, Washington and his men will be stripped of their arms and will be sent back packing into the woods back to Virginia. Okay? Now, this starts it. This starts it. The French and Indian War, as you're going to continue to read, this is the catalyst. This is the thing that changes. It's after this point everything changes, because now the British have to focus on what we're doing. Up to that point, they hadn't really focused on us, but now, because of this action, because we basically are going to declare war on the French. For 2 years, we're going to try to fight the French, and we are going to run the risk of losing part of Pennsylvania, part of New York, and we're going to wind up in so much trouble because we're going to lose so much territory that we have to turn to William Pitt in England to come and rescue us. Now, that's the first thing the French and Indian War does. The second thing, and probably even more important, is it causes the colonists to realize that they have common cause with each other, that they have issues, they have problems, they have circumstances that are different than the people in Europe. Okay? They've got a kind of life that's happening over here that people in England wouldn't understand. So this is going to be the first time that these colonists are going to meet together to try to work on things that they have mutual cause. Now, not all of the colonies come together. Only about 7 of the colonies are going to be involved in this first meeting. But these colonists are going to come back together 4 times in this chapter. Okay? Each time as a result of some kind of crisis. Okay? Each time as a result of some kind of crisis. The thing about this first one, which I'm just going to briefly mention, because we're going to talk about all 4 of these encounters in the next video, is that it accomplishes nothing. It accomplishes nothing. The legislatures of each of the colonies rejects the work that these guys do at this Congress. Okay? The thing that it does, and the reason I want to stress it so much, is not for what it accomplished, but it's for the introductions that are met. You've got people like Thomas Hutchinson from Massachusetts. You got people like Benjamin Franklin from Pennsylvania. These individuals are going to meet together for the first time with common cause different than what the British government has an understanding. They come together with the idea, we need to build us an army to protect us from the French and from the Indians. Okay. Again, this movement is new. It's something that hasn't been taking place before, and these people, when they meet each other, as soon as the next crisis comes up, then all of a sudden, bam! All of the same people are back again. They come together in this second meeting, which I believe is the Stamp Act crisis. So, what we're looking at is the first time these individual colonies, which really sees themselves as independent little entities, it's one of the first times they really start taking stock of the fact that they have common cause with one another and they could benefit from the assistance of each other. And so the French and Indian War is the first step. This French and Indian War is the first step. The British are going to have to come and rescue us, as you're going to read about in your text. And it's going to change things. Everything will change from this point forward. Okay? So continue to read your text, continue to take your quizzes as you're reading the text, and don't forget to do the writing assignment.